The Commanders' search for their new defensive coordinator is finally being allowed to progress thanks to this breaking news on Monday morning. Also, which players on the team could be cut and who could be cut around the league that the Commanders could look to target in the offseason. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Full Command Show. My name is Grant Mitchell, and happy Monday to everybody out there. Yes, it is Monday, the start of a new week, but it can still be a great week, so let's keep a positive attitude, and let's enjoy it as such. We were spoiled with great NFL playoff games over the weekend. We got the national championship game tonight. Nothing to complain about. By the way, any Indiana fans, any Miami fans, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think your score predictions are as well. So we got a cool video coming up today. We're going to start off with the latest coaching news that includes a big move at defensive coordinator, and finally, I'm going to say, can get the ball rolling on the Commanders' search. We know that they have been interviewing candidates, but nothing has materialized since then. There's been no progress. With today's news, I have a feeling that's going to change. And then we're going to transition and we're going to talk about players on and off the Commanders roster who could be cut and what impacts they could have heading into next season. So guys, gather around. If you are new around here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Press the like and the hype buttons if you are enjoying the content as well. And as always, feel free to leave me your comments down below. I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. So the big coaching news on Monday morning is that the Bills fired Sean McDermott. That means there are now 10 head coaching openings this job cycle, which is wild. A third of the league is going to have a new head coach next season. I have no clue what this means. I don't know who the candidates are. I saw Diana Rossini say that Brian Daboll was linked to the job. I have a feeling they might just promote Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator, who everybody loves. But I don't know if that's going to attract interest from elsewhere around the league. And we have David Blau, right? But I don't know if a guy who already had a job lined up is now going to jump ship and go to Buffalo. But that's not even the news it's the biggest news this morning, but it's not the biggest news for the Commanders. That news is that the Falcons officially agreed to retain Jeff Ulbrich, and he signed a new 3-year deal to work with Kevin Stefanski down in Atlanta. Now, as I have brought up numerous times throughout this entire process, the Commanders wanted to speak to Jeff Ulbrich. It definitely seemed like he was the clubhouse favorite, and I don't mean favorite in a betting perspective. I mean literally Dan Quinn wanted Jeff Ulbrich. That's just the way that it seemed. There was no progress after interviews, no second interviews, no get guys in person, no reported interest or anything like that. Just, hey, Commanders want to speak to Jeff Ulbrich. Jeff Ulbrich is a top target, etc., etc. Well, now with this officially done and dusted, we can put that to bed. There is still the Raheem Morris piece of it, but it does seem like he's willing to go to TV if he can't land a head coaching job, and it doesn't seem like he will. So, with those two guys seemingly out of the mix, Ulbrich definitely out of it, Raheem Morris I do think is out of it, the Commanders will be allowed to turn their attention back to the candidates that they have in front of them, including Carl Scott, Denard Wilson, Patrick Graham, Brian Flores, Jonathan Gannon. All those other guys, they can now finally get to step in a little bit on this process, because while there are lots of openings, there are lots of guys interviewing around, and you don't want to rush anything, you also don't want to get caught with your pants down. You don't want to be left behind when your top target signs a deal, right? So we just got to wait and see what happens, but I think we should have more progress this week. That's the way that I see it. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video. We're going to talk about cut candidates. And again, shout out to you guys. I saw several people recommend this video topic in the comments below. So if you have ideas for future videos, also feel free to throw them down there, because I read everything. And if it's a good idea, I'll make sure to do it. So, cut candidates. I'm going to start with 5 Commanders who could be cut, and then we're going to talk about other players around the league who could be cut. And not even necessarily that they're like my favorite players in the world, and I think they would be perfect for the Commanders, but it is the cut market. You know, you're not finding all pros just walking around out there, so it's kind of a best of the rest deal. And anyway, I'll just save it. You'll see who my picks are. But let's start with the players on the Commanders right now who could be cut. So number 1, everybody knows this one, Marshon Lattimore. He has an $18.5 million hit next year. You can cut him and save all of it. No penalty. Save $18.5 million against the cap. We know that Lattimore is done here. I'll defend Adam Peters one final time, and hopefully this is the final time that I have to bring this up. Maybe I think it's an inevitability that Lattimore is cut, so maybe I'll have to go over the spiel one more time. But Adam Peters did what he had to do. The Commanders were clearly in a Super Bowl window year one. They didn't expect to be, but they were clearly Super Bowl contenders. They had the worst secondary in the NFL. They had to try something. Lattimore was really the only guy out there that they could have gotten. They got him. The valuable asset they had to get was a third-round pick. And not that that's nothing, but you weren't breaking the bank to do it. They had to do it. It failed. It's not Adam Peters' fault. I'm going to defend him. He had to do something. If he stood pat at the deadline, everybody would have said, really, you're just going to keep Michael Davis and Benjamin St-Juste and Emmanuel Forbes as your corners? Well, he did something, it didn't work out. It happens. That happens in life. C'est la vie. People get drafted all the time and they're busts. Front offices, GMs, they don't hope that happens. It's just the way that life goes sometimes. But the poor play, the torn ACL, and then after that, as if there was ever a chance of him getting back on the team, getting arrested for riding around loaded, this money is going to be spent somewhere else. So, number one, Marshon Lattimore, I can practically guarantee he will be cut from this team. Number two, this might be a surprise. I'm going to say Frankie Luvu. Now, he has an $11.3 million hit next year. Cutting him would save $4.4 million. I don't think he will be cut. I want to make that clear. But I'm putting this out there in the sense that I think there could be change. Because I think he could be a trade target too. He is entering the final year of his deal, and you never want to lose the value of your asset for nothing. So if the Commanders don't have plans to re-sign Frankie Luvu for the long term, then they could get off of him and save money by cutting him, or they could trade him and get an asset back. That's what they did with Brian Robinson Jr. People do this all over the place. There's plenty of examples of it, but this is a recent example that's fresh in our mind. They drafted his replacement in Bill. They knew that they weren't going to re-sign him. They knew that he was in the final year of his deal, so they traded him, and they got back a 6th-round pick. In Frankie Luvu's case, if he is traded, obviously you get the pick or a player. If you cut him, you might not get value, but you get more money for your cap. As we saw last year compared to the year before, Frankie Luvu can be a very good player. But if you don't put him in positions to succeed, get him in the right spots, then he's going to disappoint you. And that's the way with everybody, right? If you try to get a safety to play running back, it might not go over very well. But Luvu wasn't necessarily doing that. He did have to move to edge, but even when he was playing linebacker, just the scheme and the spots that he was popping up in, it didn't fit his personal style. So his fate might depend on the new defensive coordinator. What vision does that person have for him? How can they utilize his skills? And if they don't think they'll maximize him specifically in the interest of maximizing the defense overall, then maybe the team looks to move on from Frankie Luvu. There was a steep drop in his production last year, again, relative to the year before. Everybody seems to like Jordan McGee. They drafted Kane Medrano, and there's a real chance they draft Sonny Styles or Arvell Reese, or they make a move in free agency for a guy like Devin Lloyd or Quay Walker or Devin Bush. So with all of that out there in the open, again, not saying that Frankie Luvu will be cut, but cut, traded, there's a possibility Frankie Luvu is on the move in this upcoming offseason. Number 3 for me is Will Harris. He's going to make $5 million against the cap, or he's going to count for $5 million against the cap. Cutting him would save $4 million of that. Everybody talks about Will Harris like he's the second coming of Troy Polamalu, which is very confusing to me because a lot of those same people were also furious that we got off of Jeremy Chin. People just look at Will Harris as when he went out of the lineup, the defense collapsed. Well, we saw him come back, and Will Harris was far from our biggest problem, but he certainly wasn't great. He wasn't horrible, but he wasn't very good either. So he's solid. That entire secondary, for the most part, aside from Trey Amos, could use a refresh, could use a reboot. If our new DC is a zone-heavy guy and he values coverage instincts, this could definitely happen. So we would need to replace him. If you draft Caleb Downs, that can play into this as well, obviously. But Will Harris is a guy who's high on that list in terms of just being expendable. He's on, let's see, how old is he? I think he's going to be over 30. He's already 30. He had his birthday on December 19th. Yeah. So he'll be 30, 31 even in the middle of next season. So this is something that could happen. Nick Allegretti, he has a $7.2 million cap hit. If you save him, you cut him, you'll save half of that, $3.6 million. He was just unplayable at guard. He was unplayable at guard. He was horrible at center. The team already drafted Connerly / traded for Tunsil, and in doing so, that allowed them to move Coleman over. Also, that maybe not all, that's harsh, but in part so they could get Allegretti and Wiley out of the lineup. They wanted different guys on the field. They were able to do that. The line got a lot better. Even after last year in the run to the conference championship game, what was the first thing the Commanders did in the offseason? Hey, we got to go upgrade the offensive line. We are drafting in the first round Josh Connolly Jr., and we're making a big trade for who? Laramie Tunsil. We're solidifying the offensive line. Allegretti clearly does not have a place here unless it's a full-time backup. Now, he's an okay backup, but we saw him come in, and again, he just looked horrible. So you would save solid money here. $3.6 million isn't exactly the most in the world. It's not the $18.5 million for Marshon Lattimore, but it can be the difference between getting the player and missing out on them. So Nick Allegretti, I would say, is at risk. And then Daron Payne is going to be my fifth and final player here. And there could be more guys as well, but I just wanted to do a top 5. He has a $28 million cap hit this upcoming season. If you cut him, you would save $16.8 million of it. There could also be a restructuring or a trade, but I just don't see how we roll into next season with this contract in place. He had 3 sacks last season, his fewest since his 3rd year in 2020. His run defense was bad. He was ejected. He was ejected, right? Against the Lions. Payne ejected Lions. So much has happened this season. He was ejected. Okay. I remember that he punched Amon-Ra, but I couldn't remember if that came out after the game or the referee saw it in real time. Point being here, similar to Frankie Luvu, I'm not sure that Payne will be cut. I'm not sure of anything with Payne's future, but I feel pretty confident this contract will not roll over as it is in place by the time we get to next year. I just don't see how there can be a $28 million hit and this setup with the production that he's given you or the lack thereof. So my 5 guys who I think are at risk of being cut would be Marshon Lattimore, Frankie Luvu, Will Harris, Nick Allegretti, and Daron Payne. Again, of those, the least likely I think is Luvu. I think a trade would be much more possible if that's even going to happen, but nonetheless wanted to put it out there. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on it, so make sure you throw them down below. Some other targets from around the league and guys who could be cut by their respective teams. The Commanders, I think, would have varying degrees of interest in these players, and it does depend on how free agency goes. It depends on how the draft goes, but let's talk about it. Actually, before I do, let me qualify it and say there are plenty of other guys that could be cut as well. These were just the ones that sounded the most realistic to me and were the most interesting. If you've got other thoughts, again, make sure to throw them down below. Number 1 is Brandon Aiyuk. Everyone knows it's going to happen. Plain and simple. He's not going to get anywhere close to as much money on the deal he signs with his new team. He didn't try to argue when the 49ers refused to pay him his money. He said, that's fine. I'm not even interested. I'm going to go somewhere else. He wants to go where he's happy. I think he'd be happy in Washington because Jaden Daniels is here, and it's a new offense, younger focus. Everybody seems to love DQ. I think there's probably a 50-50 chance he's on the Commanders next year. I can see both sides of the coin. I personally will be staying away from it, but again, if you just get him for super, super cheap and it's a bit of a flyer, then honestly, who cares? Because we do need help at receiver. Cole Kmet has an $11.6 million cap hit. The Bears would save $8.4 million, and I believe they only have about $1 million in free space heading into heading into the offseason. The Bears like to go big. They like to run the ball, 11, 12, 13 personnel, get the tight ends on the field. So Cole Kmet is a solid player and would make sense for them, but this is more of just them being strapped for cash. That's the reason that I put him in here. Jameis Winston. He has a $5 million cap hit next year. The Giants would save $2.7 million by cutting him. The Giants don't need all of these backups. I mean, they had 4 guys. They had to cut, what's his name? They had to cut Tommy Cutlets. They had to cut Tommy DeVito. They could bring him back for the cheap, save a little money on Jameis Winston. Jameis, I think, would be an excellent veteran presence. Everybody loves Jameis. He'd be there spiritually for Jaden. They both share that. They're very strong in their faith. And Jameis would save the Commanders money against the cap. Is he as good as Marcus Mariota? No, he's not. But Mariota's making $8 million against the cap this year for a backup quarterback. Ideally, you never want your backup quarterback on the field. It does happen at times, but you really should not be banking on your backup quarterback. And if you are, you've got bigger, more systemic issues anyway, and you're probably not contending for anything. So Jameis, saving money, good guy, could win a game or two here and there. Think that makes sense. Marlon Humphrey, he's going to be 30 this year, I believe. He has a $26 million cap hit, which is a lot for a corner who's past his prime. The Ravens would save $7 million by cutting him. The Commanders do need help in their secondary, and th've been prone to taking these sort of stopgap players. And if they go through the offseason and they don't feel confident about him, bringing in the veteran who's, been in big games, won big games. He's a bit of a goofball, it seems like, but a solid player as well. May not be the worst thing in the world, although definitely probably lower on my list. Bryce Huff, he has a $5.4 million cap hit. The Cardinals would save all of it. However, there are void years, which you'd have to factor into it. Jonnu Smith, because the Commanders still need a tight end. He's got a $10.8 million cap hit next year. The team would save $7 million. The Steelers would if they cut him. Not a very productive year this year. I think only 200-something receiving yards. But last year, I think it was, he had like 800 with the Dolphins. So he can be a productive player. They've used him in very weird spots. They were giving him handoffs and tosses. I don't know, Arthur Smith is a weirdo, but the Commanders need bodies, and he would be one of them. L'Jarius Sneed, 29-year-old corner for the Titans. He's got a $20 million cap hit over the next 2 years. The Titans would save $12 million this year and $4.5 million next year by cutting him. Sneed was once looked at as one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. He is nowhere near that standard. That everything has gone wrong for the Titans. What's the law? The name of the law? What can go wrong will go wrong. That's not Murphy's Law, is it? Whatever it is, that just feels like what happened in Tennessee. Sneed, I think, could still be a solid player. And again, if the Commanders kind of desperate for a 1-year stopgap again, like they have been, and that wouldn't even be unrealistic. There's so many holes to plug on this roster that I could see them needing to go out and do something like this. So L'Jarius Sneed could be a candidate for them. Joe Mixon has a $10.5 million cap hit next year. The Texans would save $8.5 million. Woody Marks is not very good, but he's probably as good as Joe Mixon is going to be at 30 coming off of a knee injury. So I don't believe that they will be bringing him back. The Commanders, if they want to bring him in as like a third down committee sort of guy on a 1-year deal, I can see something like that happening. Goal line work, stuff like that. Not the bell cow by any stretch, but again, just a 1 year to help stem the tide. Dawson Knox, he has an $18.7 million cap hit next year for the Bills. They would save $11.3 million by cutting him. He hasn't been all that productive recently, and a big part of that is because they drafted Dalton Kincaid in the first round, so clearly they have their established number 1 tight end. Again, the Commanders, we got no clue if Ben Sinnott is the guy or not, but we do know that beyond that, they have John Bates, who's a blocking tight end, Colson Yankoff, who's kind of a worse version of both Bates and Sinnott, and there's no top receiving guy. So Knox has had 500-yard seasons in the NFL, which isn't groundbreaking, but it might be the best that the Commanders could put out there on the field. And then the final guy that I've written down is Jonathan Greenard, who is a linebacker for the Vikings. He's got a $22.3 million cap hit the next 2 years. They would save $12.4 million by cutting him. He's got some very interesting numbers. This season, I think he had 3 sacks, and then the year before it might have been 1, and then the year before that it was 12.5. And then it was 4, and then it was 12, and then it was 1. So very up and down production, and I would definitely need to do more research on this guy if the team were to display a level of interest, and if he were to be cut by the Vikings, and there's a chance for the Commanders to bring him in. But he's a good player. When you watch him play, that much becomes pretty apparent. The Vikings have talent on their defense. If Brian Flores stays, he can get the most out of lesser guys. If Brian Flores comes to DC, he was just working with Jonathan Greenard. So that's why he makes my list, and he rounds out my top 11. I thought I made 10, but my top 11. Yeah. Anyway, so just to recap on those players: Brandon Aiyuk, Cole Kmet, Jameis Winston, Marlon Humphrey, Bryce Huff, Jonnu Smith, L'Jarius Sneed, Joe Mixon, Dawson Knox, and Jonathan Greenard. Guys, what are your thoughts on this video? Again, we kind of hit on all sorts of different topics. You've got Ulbrich staying with the Falcons, so the Commanders DC search can continue. You've got cut candidates for the Commanders, guys around the league who might be cut. Whatever your thoughts are, make sure you drop them down below. Like this video if you did enjoy. Again, I have a feeling news is going to start to pick up now that Ulbrich is staying in Atlanta, so you might see me again later today. Don't know, just got to wait and see, but subscribe. Make sure you're locked in for all upcoming videos, and I appreciate y'all joining me. I will catch you in the next one. Have a great day.